Hello students, welcome back to one more session on public international law. In the last class we started our discussion on chapter state succession, its meaning, introduction, as well as the definition of this term state succession was discussed, and further we also discussed about the difference between succession of state and succession of government. And next part of the discussion on this chapter is that of theories of state succession. So, in this regard, as I told, there is divergence of opinion among thinkers, jurists, as to the true scope and the principles involved in the state succession. And we almost find more than 9 to 10 theories propounded by different jurists as to the theoretical background or theoretical basis for this concept of state succession. In today's class, let us endeavor to find out what those different theories tell about the concept of state succession, how it works, what are the things which can be subject matter of succession, what cannot be the subject matter of succession. All these things will be studied in detail in today's session. So let us start with this. So first one is this is the broad outline, whatever you can see on the slide. This is the broad outline of the theories of succession. So we'll start with the first one, universal succession, then popular continuity theory, then organic substitution theory, then goes to the burden with not burden, sorry, this is not the one. So after organic substitution theory, we'll be studying about self-abnegation theory. Then comes clean slate theory, which is considered as the most popular theories among all of them. Next comes the socialist theory, which is also known as communist theory. Then comes option theory, and finally burden with benefit theory. So there are few more theories which the some of the writers have included in their list, but I feel this is the broad network that is sufficient, or an overview of these many theories is sufficient for our discussion as far as theories of succession of state is concerned. So let us start with the first one, that is universal succession theory. So what is this universal succession theory is about, and who are the important propounders of this theory? These are few things we'll be discussing. The first one is chief exponents of this theory is Hugo Grotius, who is also known as the father of modern international law. So he is the person who propounded or who vehemently put forward or supported the concept of universal succession. So we already discussed the concept of succession. Succession is going to be the change of sovereignty over a territory, thereby what is going to happen to the rights and obligations of the predecessor states, whether it goes to the successor state, is something which we'll be discussing in all these theories. As far as Hugo Grotius is concerned, in this theory, he says that there shall be universal succession. Universal means everything, whatever the rights which the predecessor state which lost the sovereignty, whatever it rights and obligations are there, they become rights and obligations of the successor state. That is the assertion made by Hugo Grotius and his supporters. Let us try to find out what is important principles involved in this theory. All the rights and obligations of predecessor states pass to successor state upon the change of sovereignty. That is the assertion made by Hugo Grotius and his supporters. Let us try to find out the justifications for this as such. Justifications are: change in sovereignty does not change the origin. This theory of universal succession is based on one, what we say, presumption. What is the presumption? Is that the origin of state is divine in nature. So God has created the state. God has created the state. That being the case, mere change in the people who are going to rule the country, rule the territory, is not going to affect the origin. As the originator is the God, God remains the same and state remains the same. Only the sovereignty changes. Therefore, mere change in the sovereignty does not change the origin. Therefore, the state remains intact. Only sovereignty changes. So the state as such is there. So whatever the rights and obligations with the sovereign had, earlier sovereign had, those rights are going to be succeeded by the successor sovereign. That is how it works according to universal succession theory. Okay, so these are the important principles, and state remains immortal and permanent. I am not saying that whatever they say is right. I am just putting forth the views expressed by Hugo Grotius and his supporters. I'm not saying that this is right. So there are people who criticize these views. So this is the assertion made by Hugo Grotius. He says that state remains immortal and permanent. A lot of questions are going to be raised as to how can you assert so, because we find so many states which have disappeared now, and some of the states there have been drastic change in their boundaries, or their very existence or identity have been lost. That being the case, to a great extent we may not be in a position to accept that the state remains immortal and permanent. So that being the criticism against this theory. Moving further is the sovereignty signifies autonomous character of the community. Once we say a state is sovereign, that shows that it has autonomy, it has freedom from all restrictions, it is at the highest level, and it is not bound by any other rules. That makes the state a sovereign state. So, sovereignty signifies autonomous character of the whole community. And that being the case, the criticism against this theory is that this state concept of state succession or universal succession cannot be transmitted to another community. Earlier there was a state, earlier there was a set of community. That community had its own ideologies, it has its own background, it has its own plans. But once a new community, once a new autonomous institution or the sovereignty has been brought into existence, you cannot control this new entity or new sovereign setup by the old sovereign setup. So that should not be allowed. That is also considered as the reason why some of the states or some of the jurists, they don't accept universal succession theory propounded by Hugo Grotius. These are few important things which we should know as far as universal succession theory of state. Okay, moving further is the next one is popular continuity theory. I can tell you, if at all we go back to the this chart outline, so almost all these theories which are on the left side, basically the mainframe, universal succession theory, popular continuity theory, organic substitution theory, and even to some extent self-abnegation theory on the other side. They all are different phases of universal succession theory. That is an important thing which all of us uh, should know at the outset. At the outset, we should know that most of these theories on the um left side of your slide, and also some of the theories even on the right side, which includes self-abnegation theory, they are all of the they are all going to be in agreement that there shall be universal succession. But they have given different justifications, different reasons, or their principles are different, but ultimately the goal or ultimately the outcome is same. So whenever there is going to be state succession, the predecessor states rights and obligations will be succeeded by the successor state. So let us proceed further with the popular continuity theory. It is a new version of universal succession theory. As I told, it's a new version of universal succession theory. Important exponents are Fiore and Fredier. These are the important exponents, and they are of the opinion, or they asserted that there are two kinds of personalities which a state is going to have. Every state is going to have two personalities. One is political personality, and the second one is social personality. What is this political personality and what is the social personality? Social personality includes the population and territory, and they remain same. Population, mere change in the state is not necessarily going to bring change in the population, nor it is going to bring change in the territory. That being the case, territory and population, they have a they have a bond, they have a strong bond with each other. That is what is going to constitute the social personality. And political personality is nothing but sovereignty. Sovereignty represents the political personality. Every state is going to have both of them. Every state is going to have both of them: political sovereignty, political personality, and social personality. Moving further, this succession is going to only affects the political commitments of the state. Whenever there is change in the sovereignty over a territory, so it is going to have an effect on only the political commitments of the states. So commitments which are in the nature of political policy of a government or a state which was in existence, that is going to be affected by state succession. Apart from that, that means anything which is having some political connotations or political implications, they are going to change. Whereas those rights and obligations which are commitments which are concerned with the social personality, they remain intact. Rights and obligations attached to the society as a social personality of the state, it remains intact. That is what has been said by this organ substitution theory. So they say that rights and obligations of political character are to lapse with the state. So rights and obligations are political in character, maybe whether to have a friendly relationship with some state or not, in this regard, or what kind of a foreign policy we should have with some other state, they are political issues. So they may change with the change in state or succession of state, whereas other obligations and rights connected with the territory and population, they remain intact. They remain intact. So that's with respect to popular continuity theory. Then organic substitution theory, again another phase of universal succession theory. So chief exponent in this regard is Max Huber. Let us see what his principles are all about. So he says that it is new explanation for continuity of rights and obligations. That's what I said. So even in this theory, they have been giving a new explanation for continuity of rights and obligations of whom? Rights and obligations of predecessor state to that of successor state. And what is the basis? According to this theory, the basis is organic substitution. Organic substitution is the basis. How it works, why, what are the implications of this? Let us try to understand. They say that rights and duties of state continue even after a succession by another state, because people and territory have an organic bond similar to what we discussed in the earlier theory. And further, organic bond remains intact, and only juridical element, as we talk about the juristic personality, we studied the concept of personality in jurisprudence. There we heard of this concept of natural person and juridical person, or judicial and legal personalities. This concept of state is only a juridical element, whereas the people and territory having an organic bond, they remain same. So that being the case, mere changes in the sovereignty is not necessarily going to change the rights and obligations. It's just a substitution by a old personality, old sovereign personality to the new system, whereas the territory and the what we say the population, they remain same. And that being the case, their rights and obligations are also going to be continued. This is what organic substitution theory tells. Moving further is self-abnegation theory. This is going to explain the concept of universal succession to the rights and obligations of a predecessor state to the successor state, based on a concept of moral duty. What is that? We will try to understand. So chief exponent is Jelinek, and he says that and again, as I said, it is another version of universal continuity, and the basis is an act of auto limitation, a self-imposed limitation by a state, whereby it is going to tell, or it is going to declare, or it is by its express words or by conduct, that we are also going to be bound are as well as entitled to the predecessor state's obligations and rights respectively. That is the sense in which the state successor state is going to impose limitation on itself. They say that successor state agrees to observe the rules of international law and perform the obligations of its predecessor state. On the basis of what? On the basis of auto limitation. They say that yes, we will agree to observe the rules of international law and perform the obligations of predecessor state. That's what the successor state is going to tell, or it is going to act. That's what is Jelnik says. And duty of self-abnegation is a moral duty. It is not something which has been imposed externally. Most of the new states, they come with this sense of moral duty, being bound by international law. Therefore, as we are bound by the international law, we are accepting even the rights and obligations of our predecessor state. That is the basis of state succession, and therefore every right and obligation of predecessor state will succeed to the successor state. They have to agree to that, agree for such a succession as a as a as a matter of moral duty. This is what has been considered as the important principle as put forward by this proponents of self-abnegation theory. Further is the clean slate theory. As I told in the earlier classes, clean state theory is considered as the most practical and the most widely practiced theory as of now in most of the in case of most of the states as of now. So let us see what is this clean slate theory. The name itself gives a suggestion as to what it is. This chief exponents of this theory is Pfaffendorf. There are many more supporters for them. Among them, the most important is that of Pfaffendorf. Let us try to find out what he says and his supporters say. Complete disappearance of predecessor state's personality. You see that once an old state disappears or it loses its sovereignty and a new state establishes its sovereignty, the new state is completely a new personality. Completely a new personality having no relationship or links whatsoever with predecessor state, and successor state is entirely a new sovereign personality, and successor state derive its authority from none other than itself. Who created the state? It has been created by itself. So sovereignty gets its authority by itself. Nobody gives it its authority. If at all we say that a sovereign has received its authority from someone else, then we cannot consider that authority as a sovereign at all. So that is the basis. To say we are sovereign, sovereignty comes on its own, from within, by itself. Okay, therefore, successor state derives its authority from none other than itself. That being the case, there is no question of we succeeding to the rights and obligations of some other state. If at all there can be a succession only with respect to right, they say. Succession to right only and not liabilities and obligations. We have right towards the territory, we have right towards the properties. People have taken loan from us, from the predecessor state illegally, from the resources which have been generated from our territory. For them you are liable, so you are liable and I am entitled to. So according to this clean slate theory, they say that succession can happen only with respect to rights and not with respect to liabilities. One of the most important contention of clean slate theory. That's the key principle under this head. So that's with respect to clean slate theory. Moving further is the socialist theory. What is the socialist theory, or which is also called as communist theory as such? Let us look into some of the important features of this theory. They say that communist state considers succession a case of novation and not of succession. I hope you studied the concept of novation in your contract. Novation is one of the modes of discharge of contract. Whenever an old contract is substituted by a new contract with the consideration being the discharge of the previous contract is called as novation under contract, which you studied. So even the communists consider succession is a case of novation than of succession. So a new contract has come, whereby the consideration for this is what the old regime whatever is there, it is stands discharged. It is entirely a new state which has been brought into existence. So that is the way in which the state succession works. It is not actually succession, it is novation. The name itself suggests this new concept is going to automatically bring an end to the old regime. That's how it works according to socialist theory. Moving further, no succession to rights and obligations affecting the political and economic interest of successor state. If at all there are few obligations, if at all there are few rights, if at all those obligations, especially if they are going to affect the political and economic interest of the successor state, then with respect to such rights and such obligations, there won't be any succession. If it adversely affects the economic and political interest of the successor state, they may say that we don't accept those obligations or rights of the previous regime. If at all they may be beneficial to our interest, then we may accept. But there is no question of accepting on its own. No succession to exploitative rights and obligations. Whenever some states, whenever we say that some rights and obligations have been undertaken by the previous regime, which is exploitative in nature, then also there is no question of succession which can take place to the new regime. It cannot happen. And further is option theory. Option theory, what it is all about? Option theory says that chief exponent is Maconan. Maconan says that newly independent states are free to pick and choose. Whatever want they can choose, whatever they don't want they can say that we won't accept that. So it is left to the discretion of the successor state. So they will before they decide whether to what is going to be our their rights and liability, they will pick and choose. They say that these are few rights and obligations which we feel proper, we will accept. Rest of the obligations which we feel it is not proper, we will not accept them. In this way, they can pick and choose as to what rights and obligations which we continue to oblige and what rights and obligations which we reject. That option is there to sovereign state, successor states. That is what has been said by the exponents of this option theory. And lastly, it is burden with benefit. As it happens in your other laws, which we studied in our law of succession, the onerous bequest. I hope you heard of this term, and I hope all of you remember the concept of onerous bequest, saying that if at all someone has been giving some properties to you through will, then along with that, if he gives any burden, you have to take both. You cannot say that I will take only the benefit, I will reject the onerous. You have to take both. Similarly, if you are taking rights and liable obligations of predecessor state, you have to take the burden as well as benefit, and you cannot choose only the benefit and reject the burden. Chief exponents are H. Wilkinson, and he says that no obligation to accept the financial obligations of predecessor, and successor state is bound by the obligations if the territory has received and derived any benefit out of borrowing. An obligation has been, we have borrowed, state has borrowed loan from World Bank, and it has been used for building infrastructure, and there has been a state succession, new regime has come, new regime is going to use those roads which were built using the funds received from World Bank or IMF. Then you are bound to repay the debt. You cannot say that I am not liable financially, because your territory has derived benefits from that borrowing. You are bound to repay the loan. That way it works. Then rejection of financial obligations incurred by a previous regime for the personal benefit of sovereign. If at all the previous sovereign for his personal benefits or his personal use, if at all some state liabilities have been incurred or states obligations have been incurred, then there won't be state succession as far as those obligations are concerned. So in this way the different jurists have tried to give different explanations as to how the concept of state succession works, what rights can be subject matter of succession, what kinds of rights and obligations cannot be subject matter of succession. In this regard, there is divergence, there is no consensus or unanimity. Because of these divergences only, we are still not in a position to codify in an effective way the states, what we say, codify the international law dealing with succession of state. Efforts, as I told in the previous class also, efforts were made many a times to codify, even though there are few treaties dealing with treaties, international laws dealing with succession of states, but there is a divergence between the law and practice. The most of the states, they won't accept most of the laws which have been codified dealing with state succession, and different states follow different practices as per their convenience. So these are few important things which we should know as far as theories of succession of state. So let us recollect. We have almost 9 theories which we discussed today. Universal succession theory. Another phase is popular continuity theory. Another phase for of the same theory is organic substitution theory, as well as burden with no not self-abnegation theory. Only difference among these 4 theories is as to their justifications or reasons for universal succession, whereas clean slate theory is quite opposite, diagonal opposite to universal succession theory. It says that a new state or successor state is entirely a new personality having no relationship with the previous regime, and it has got its sovereignty by itself, and it is not being given by anyone else. And socialist theory also says that we cannot accept every obligation or right of a previous regime. Same is the case with option theory and burden with benefit theory. So these are some of the important theories which you need to explain whenever they ask a question on theories of state succession. With this, we will conclude our session for the day, and in the next class, we will be discussing about the effect of state succession on treaty obligations under specific heads, and also implications of state succession on contractual obligations, rights and obligations under contracts. Those are few things which will be discussed in detail in the next class, along with that of kinds of succession, which includes universal succession and partial succession. We'll be discussing them in greater details in the next video. With this, we'll conclude this class. Thanks to all of you.